Hey everybody, Lewis here from Status Coup. We are in East Palestine, fifth trip back in the last year. Happy to be joined. I think this might actually be the fifth time we've talked to. I don't know, at least the fourth probably. Here with Stella and Darren Gamble. Thanks for taking the time. First off, I'm curious. So for folks who have been watching, you might notice we're actually back in Darren and Stella's home in East Palestine. I'm curious for the circumstances of kind of how you ended up moving from your temporary relocation back home and kind of how it's been so far.
Well, we ended up coming back because they were ending the relocation program. And we decided that we were going to come back for Christmas, even though the relocation program wasn't going to technically end until the 1st of February, but we decided if we were coming back, we were just going to come back for the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
And
the remediation was supposed to have been done by then, all the dirt and everything was supposed to have been hauled out. So, we figured, well, I mean, it's just got to go sometime, I guess. And,
right.
And it was a choice that, I think we had to make. I mean,
our grandkids are all here in town and so on, and Darren was driving the kids, a couple hours a day back and forth to school and so on, and the remediation was supposed to be done.
Right.
So we came back.
Right. And at a certain point, I mean, whether it's you all and a lot of other folks we've talked to who are in hotels or bouncing around between Airbnbs, I mean, you can only do that for so long before it starts to drive you nuts and you want to sleep in your own bed and be, the convenience of, again, not driving all over the place and having some things here and some things there.
Our kids too. I mean, our kids all have issues. Our foster kids, they have anxiety issues. They're on medications and so on, and they've been they were away from their friends for a year for COVID, and then they were away from their friends for a year with this, and they were stuck in the house with no friends and nowhere to go and no social life. So it was taking a big toll on them psychologically and starting to come out in their behaviors and so on. So, that was another reason that we came back. And like I said, that the main reason is our family's here, and we were going to have to come back anyway because financially we couldn't stay gone, without the relocation program.
Right. And I'm curious now, so you've been back for about a month or so now, it sounds like. I know, Darren, for the most part, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were, this has kind of affected different people health-wise. For the most part, you weren't really having health symptoms before. Stella, I know you had been having them before. I'm curious, since coming back, how has that been for you all? Are you noticing any symptoms? Darren, are you still feeling okay?
Well, up until a week ago, I had no symptoms at all. And before that, whenever I would come in just for a couple of hours, I would get really bad symptoms. But for the past week, my symptoms are back now. Mm-hmm. They're back as bad or worse than they were from the beginning. I have tingling through my whole body, dizziness, disorientation, intestinal issues, headaches. Some days I can't even get out of my chair. And it's as bad now as it was in the beginning. But like I said, up until this past week, everything seemed fine.
The funny thing about that, though, is, when we came home the first time, I think it was on February 8th.
Mm-hmm. The first time meaning like a year ago, basically.
Yeah.
Yep.
She wasn't really having issues when we first came home then. But on March 4th, before they started the second temporary relocation, she went over and talked to him at the assistance center because after being here for 3 or 4 weeks the first time is when she really, really got sick.
Right.
And, this before they announced anything, and they said, yeah, we'll get you out of there. We'll do whatever you want to do, which, they stood to their word on that.
But they
to me,
hadn't
it's funny
started
that, it's
Right, about the same amount of
about the
time.
same amount of time when there's no symptoms. So, then you gradually, does this collect in your body? And,
Right,
and,
right. I mean, if you're in a situation where even if it's a low level of something still
Right,
in the air, still in
right.
the soil, or whatever it may be,
Right, I mean,
if you're experiencing it for a couple hours, maybe you're going to be fine. Like
Absolutely.
is the case for me, right? Like I'm in and out of town. We're not
Mhm.
staying in town, but if I were to stay here, or if anyone were to stay here for a month, at that point, that could
Well,
start to make that
the
issue.
thing that gets me is we have enough air purifiers in our house to purify a hotel.
Mhm.
I make it a point not to
that was red right now.
go outside. I make it a point not to do much shopping in town. When I leave here, I go to my car and I leave town.
Mhm.
So the part that's really scary to me is that I'm getting sick, and I understand that people get sick and there's flu and so on and so forth, but this is absolutely identifiable because I get the tingling across my shoulders, the tingling through my body. I'm 70 years old. I've had the flu. I've had gallbladder attacks. I've had medical issues over the years. And this is not just, I have the flu.
Right.
It's not but if we have all these air purifiers, how am I getting affected by these chemicals?
Mhm.
And my thing has been from day one when this first happened, my concern has been for the kids in this town.
Right.
There are so many kids that are having nosebleeds. My granddaughter's mother was just diagnosed with swelling of the spleen and swelling of the liver. Two of her neighbors, swelling of the spleen and swelling of the liver. It's not a coincidence. I know people get issues that aren't related to the chemicals, but how is it that neighbors,
Right.
that there's 3 neighbors on my daughter's street, younger women that are losing their hair?
Mhm.
1 on the street, okay, 2 on the street, but 3 of them
Right.
in a block.
Right.
There's so much of this that isn't coincidence, and it's not from eating onions, and it's not
Right.
from building a fire outside.
Right.
There is something going on here.
Right. And it's still insane to me, and I know we were kind of going through all this again last night. Like the EPA throughout all of this has been like, I don't know, we're doing the testing, everything looks fine, everything looks fine, everything looks fine. Meanwhile, hundreds, if not thousands of people at this point have experienced symptoms like you're describing at one point or another during this. Members of the CDC who were in East Palestine, like the CDC, got sick when they were here and left. Obviously, you are missing something.
Right.
If
How
people
did
in those
they-
numbers, yeah.
That we're missing. How did they leave? How did they get sick and just leave us here
Right.
and not say anything? They got caught
Mhm.
through an email, or nobody would have ever known they got sick.
Right.
They are supposed to protect the people. That's what their function is. That's what their job is to investigate this.
Right.
And the only thing they could tell us is, we don't know how to treat the chemicals, but we know how to treat the cancer you're going to get.
Right.
How?
Yeah, I mean, that's around every corner there's another red flag that this was mismanaged from the beginning. And
Right.
there's something going on, and I know that you guys with Status Coup are really upset that nobody is putting these dots together when
Right.
it's so elementary. With everything that's been said about the owner of the chemicals, and it just goes on and on and on and on.
Right.
But there's no accountability. There's no solution. We know no more now than we did when this train wrecked.
Right.
It's the same.
Right.
It's they're just, well, let's see what happens to them next year and
Right.
next year and 5 years.
Right.
I hope I'm wrong, but I think some really terrible things are going to happen to this community in the foreseeable future.
And I hope we're wrong in this too.
Right.
But again,
I don't want to be the one to say I told you so, but
Right. Yeah. And but when the CDC, that was a really blunt way when the CDC put it that way when they said,
Right.
we can treat your cancer
that should
later.
have been the end of
Essentially,
it.
But like that is probably the most truthful thing that a federal
Right,
government
and
agency
as
has
hard
said
as
the
it
whole
was
time.
to hear, at least it was the truth.
Even
Right.
if they would say, hey, there's something going on, we don't know what it is,
Right.
but then you get into the responsibility and it's all the financial. I mean,
Right.
that's got to be bottom line on
Yeah.
this. There's no other, possible solution other than the money that it's costing or it will cause or,
Right.
it's unbelievable.
It's like them heating up those 1,000,000-gallon
Tanks.
tanks down there to keep them from freezing.
Mhm.
They put out a newsletter, and in the newsletter they said that you will be able to see the vapor coming from the tanks,
Right. And for
but
folks to give
not
context.
to worry
Yeah.
because it's not toxic.
Right.
Now-
These tanks are filled with water used at the cleanup site, essentially. I believe they're 1,000,000-gallon tanks or
Yes.
something
Yes.
like that. And they were freezing because it's wintertime here in Ohio, and they don't want that water freezing. So they're actively heating it up to keep the tanks from freezing. That's what Stella's talking about here.
Right.
Yeah.
So they said you can see the vapors coming off them, but don't worry, it's not toxic. Okay. Do you have to have a degree in science to understand
Mhm.
that if you boil toxic chemicals, if you boil anything, and the vapors coming off of it are actually visible, that those chemicals are in that. I don't understand how people can be so
It's the
naive.
same thing as when this first happened. They had all the aerators in the creek. And they
Right.
was blowing the chemicals in the air.
Right, and it was
trying
wrong
to get
then,
out the
and
water.
they said that it was fine then also, which was
Right.
wrong.
You-
We've talked to
but-
several experts who said that was wrong.
Right.
And frankly, when I experienced symptoms on this trip, it was mostly anytime I was near those
Right.
aerators. That was, I mean, one of the times in particular, this super, drunk feeling, basically, all the headaches, all that
And,
stuff.
I mean, just I think last week, Norfolk Southern finally come up with a plan to clean the creek. A year.
Yeah.
I mean, and the EPA is sitting back letting them
Right.
say, well, come up with a plan.
No,
we know it's been 9 months, but
Yeah.
when you get one, a year to come up with a plan to clean it.
Again, you don't have to be a scientist to figure out, okay, you have a creek. There are chemicals floating in them. The chemicals are going into the dirt, the chemicals are going under the rocks, the chemicals are going in under everybody's house, their creeks going under the businesses, the creeks run into the storm drains.
Right.
You don't have to be a scientist to know that there is no way in hell that they are ever
Gonna get.
going to
yeah.
be able to get that.
Yeah.
They just found
Yeah.
last month, a couple of friends of ours were exploring the creeks and checking out the chemicals. They just found one of those toxic socks,
Right.
the socks that they were using to
So
catch the
kind of
chemicals.
filter out some. Yeah.
That somebody must have gotten washed away
Right.
in the thing.
Yeah.
And it's laying in the middle of the creek,
Right.
stuck on a limb,
Right. Yeah.
where some kids can go down there and see it
Mhm.
and start. This is toxic poison,
Right.
and they don't even take enough care to make sure that these things are not within range of where somebody can get to them.
It's insane. I mean, we're actually going to go out and check out the creeks tomorrow. We're going to do a whole video on it and kind of see where things stand there. You brought up a point that I want to get more of your thoughts on. The owner of the chemical cars during that NTSB hearing that happened back in June
Right.
apparently told Norfolk Southern not once, not twice, but 3 times that they advised to not detonate the cars in the fashion that they did here. I mean, there's been some fines and whatnot here and there. Obviously, Norfolk Southern is having a financial expense at some of this, but to me, detonating something like that feels like somebody needs to be held accountable in a real way
Absolutely.
for that.
It's criminal.
And that's the whole thing. I mean, when they was talking about this so-called controlled event or whatever
Yes.
they want to call it, they said the temperature was rising on one car. And the evidence clearly states the temperature is going down. So if there was one car in jeopardy, say, well, hell, we'll just blow up all 5 of them. You know, if we're going to blow one, what's 4 more?
Right.
I mean, it's criminal. It has to be criminal. I mean, when I went to the climate week and I met Al Gore, And he was really up on what was going on. He had a picture of his phone from space of the plume when they did it. And he looked at me and he said, Darren, he said, what they're doing to you people is criminal. I mean, that's from our ex-vice president. And, anybody with half a mind knows that this was all mishandled from the beginning. Everybody from the local, federal, state, everybody dropped the ball. And instead of admitting, hey, everybody makes mistakes, and I'm sure when this happened, it was so bad that they really didn't have a understanding on how to address it. And it would have been better to tell us, hey, we got some shady stuff going on here. We're not sure how to do this, and at the very least, we should have been made the option, not just in the mile, but anybody in the immediate vicinity should have had the option to either sell their house and get out of here, or at least, not have to prove, and you'll pay for your stuff and we'll reimburse you. I mean, it was all a crock, the whole thing.
And just to be honest and not tell people 3 days later or whatever, it's safe to return. They could have said, okay, our initial assessment is that, there's not anything where you're going to die immediately, but we're not sure about the levels. We still have more testing to do. You can go back at your own risk. You know what I mean? Like there are so many better ways that they could have framed this.
And they tell us 3 to 4 months for the testing to come back, or 6 months for the testing to come back. How'd they get those tests back in 48 hours?
I know on the anniversary that the Government Accountability has some FOIA requests on a little bit more of what was known when this happened, and that'll be coming out on the 3rd. And I'm sure people will definitely keep an eye for those.
I'm curious. I mean, we were talking about the response to all of this. Obviously, in the beginning of this, President Biden was kind of nowhere to be seen on the East Palestine response. Never visited. He was criticized heavily for it. Former President Trump came and visited just yesterday. On Wednesday of this week, just before the anniversary here, it was announced that President Biden is going to be visiting East Palestine in February. I'm curious your thoughts on this. What do you think he's going to do at this point?
He's going to come and pose for some photos. It's going to be a photo op. And frankly, I'm a little bit embarrassed about what's going to happen when he comes to town, because if he would have come when it first happened, I don't think it would have been as bad. But now, after everybody knows he was pretty much forced by politics to come and show his face, I don't think it's going to be a good scene myself.
I think the only thing positive that could possibly come out of it is if somehow that the president can meet with some of the people that are affected, and not the mayor and not the senators, where everybody's pushed in there, everything's fine, and not the business owners. He needs to hear from the people that are affected by this, and still being affected by this. That's the only way that his visit could have any kind of a positive impact on this whole thing.
I just read an article last week where one of the business owners said that this is the best thing that could have ever happened to East Palestine.
That's insane.
Did you see the post that the city put out for the news people coming to please park at the high school or the park and not in front of the businesses downtown to deter business from East Palestine?
I didn't see that.
Yes.
Yeah. That's it. It's from our local government.
Yeah, they don't want that. They don't want the media in town. They don't want any. And you know what? It's so hard because you have to understand what these businesses have gone through. A friend of mine lost at least 40 regular customers that she's had for 30 years at her hair salon because of this happening. Valdez, the guy that has the small motor business, he almost lost his whole business. And you have to feel for those people. But on the other hand, what good is a new park going to be if all the kids are sick and they're all having chemo? Or what good is it going to do to have these businesses in town if the whole town, if everybody in town is going to be sick?
I mean, I would like to see this town recover and rebound as much as anybody else.
It's our town
I lived
too.
here 60 years. I have a stake vested in this town. But let's before we get on the road to economic recovery. Let's get on the road to health recovery. Let's
Totally.
make sure everything is okay. Right. It's not a wait and see situation. Right. You know, the businesses they might have to wait and see, but you know, I mean, anybody from outside East Palestine.
Right.
If they're not going to come to town to do business, regardless, right. You know, they're going to go to Boardman or Chippewa or Salem or something. You know?
And if I was being like the most optimistic I can be here, and unfortunately I don't think the scenario I'm about to say is going to happen. You know, one potential positive that could come from a Biden visit is if he does what you mentioned and actually comes and sits down at your table here with folks like you, with other folks that we're talking to, I mean, and actually hears what's going on versus essentially taking what the mayor says at face value, taking what the EPA says at face value, which unfortunately I think the highest likelihood of what's going to happen is he's going to come and meet with the EPA, he's going to come and meet with the mayor, he'll talk to a couple hand-selected residents, all behind closed doors, closed to the press, and he's not going to learn anything from that.
Just like we went to the State House in Columbus last summer, and we disrupted. Sure, you know, we was trying to bring attention to what's going on here. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so many people, senators and what have you, come up after and said, well, we had no idea that things are still bad in East Palestine. Right. All our reports are everything's fine in East Palestine. You know, I mean, you get one person, one senator, one representative that, you know, has already been lobbied by these people to report back to the people that make the rules.
Biden sent that McPherson here to investigate, and he from FEMA, and he absolutely refused and stated that he would not speak with any of the citizens, any of the community members, and he did his evaluation based on what the EPA told him and what our city leaders told him.
That's like another thing with the EPA, you know, they flat out refused to do indoor testing. And, you know, they have admitted that the devices they used were unacceptable, and they still won't do it. But on the other hand, they say, well, we're going to hold Norfolk Southern accountable for everything he's done. Right. So get the indoor testing, give Norfolk Southern
do another round of it with the right equipment.
If it were me and you were asking me, and I'm telling you, hey, it's safe, and you said, well, I want indoor testing, you know what I'd do? I'd come right over and do the indoor testing to shut you up.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, why don't they just do the indoor testing?
The EPA has to pay for it. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, from Biden right on down, they said all costs responsible are going to be paid for by Norfolk Southern.
So why aren't they doing it?
Well, you know, why aren't they doing it?
Right. And their excuse with all of this will be, well, we did indoor testing in the very beginning of this, blah, blah, blah. But, like, we literally have on video Mark Durno from the EPA admitting that the devices that they used weren't accurate. We've got expert after expert who've said that, that was not the way that should have been done.
And the high EPA said that Mark Durno's nose is a very valuable tool. You know, well, do you want to risk your grandchildren's lives on his nose? Yeah, I mean, it's...
And her saying that it's psychosomatic, okay? How are little kids having nosebleeds psychosomatic?
Right.
How are these people making their hair fall out or giving themselves breast cancer? You know, that guy that got the breast cancer that's been interviewed, he's not the only one, not the only male in this area that's had breast cancer.
And like when they did do some remediation of the cracks of the tunnels, I mean, common sense would say you start next to the derailment and you work away. Well, that's not what they did. They started at the farthest point, almost where Leslie Run or where Sulphur Run dumps into Leslie Runs, where they started, and they worked their way back towards the site.
And the water's running this way.
Added to the list of things that have been done poorly throughout this. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's.
And again,
you don't drink your water downstream from where the cows are in it, you know? It's just, you know, I mean.
It's so clear.
And you have to, it's hard to keep saying the same thing over and over. To me, it's just unbelievable that somewhere, somehow, somebody is not getting what's going on here.
Right.
I mean, it's, you know, I mean, turn a blind eye is one thing. This is just, you know, I mean, and people hear about it outside. I mean, when this first happened, I mean, we was pretty much all over, and anybody you talked to knew about East Palestine. But, you know, when they hear everything's fine in East Palestine, well, that's the end of the story, you know. But everything's not fine here. It's
I'll
you know,
level too.
ask yourself, would you want to live in East Palestine? I mean,
Right.
to anybody in the world, would you want
Right.
to live there?
Right.
You know, or would
And for folks from afar too, I mean, I understand that it might sound crazy that like the EPA doesn't know how to do this,
Right.
and that the CDC, you know, is
I
coming in
wouldn't
and
believe
mumbling
it
things.
if this happened somewhere else. Like,
Right. So I understand for people from afar to like assume that everything is fine, but if you spend 5 minutes doing some digging into this
Yes.
and talking to actual experts in the field who are not the EPA,
right,
they will tell you it's not just, you know, I'm not an expert in this, but the folks that we've talked to in telling the story are folks like Dr. Andrew Welton, who work at Purdue University, are experts. Folks like Judith Enck, who's a former EPA administrator, is an expert in this sort of thing. The list can go on and on and on, and these folks
Yeah.
are the ones who are, fortunately, there's at least some people trying to elevate that. Unfortunately, the people who are in a position to do something about it aren't listening to them. I don't know why.
right.
Well,
And do you have to be an expert to know that if you're going to clean the creeks, you don't start downstream?
Right. No.
That's
No.
you know.
You don't have. I mean, a 10-year-old kid can figure that out.
Right.
It's just like it goes back like to Flint, Michigan. Sure, I heard a story about Flint when it first happened and the lead pipes, and I thought, well, they'll dig them up and that'll be the end of it. But
Right.
you know, until this happened, I didn't realize it. You know, it's no better than Flint, Michigan. I
Right.
mean, the news went away, and that's
Yeah.
you know, nothing got solved.
Right.
But the limelight went away, and say, okay, move on.
Move on to the next thing.
Yeah, it's just to me, it's unbelievable.
Well, we will do our best to keep telling the story. We're not moving on from
We
these
certainly
sorts of
appreciate
things. Just like, you know, you mentioned Flint, Jordan hasn't, you know, he's
Right.
still doing digging into
Mhm.
everything going on in
Right.
Flint. We're going to continue to come back and tell what's
Well-
actually going on here. So thank you both so much for taking the time to talk with us
And
again.
Thank
and,
you for
yeah.
taking the time to
For,
listen.
you know, like
Yeah.
I said, you know, the fifth trip. I mean, that says something. You know,
Mhm.
to your involvement and to you know your commitment to our community, which is greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
Greatly.
Thank you both.